Hi, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. It has been years since I've been at an in-person conference, and it's really wonderful to see you all. As Tanya mentioned, this is the first conference about this particular topic as a resource for folks who are, engineers, but also leaders, but also like not managers. So let's start with like, who am I? And even though my official expertise is probably in databases, like why am I here? What do I know about this topic? I have spent a long time helping a company like grow from Series B all the way to an IPO, all the way past acquisition. And during that journey, I got to watch the growth of an engineering org from 30 people in a room to a few hundred to a few thousand, and all the challenges that happen with that. And part of that journey was also helping grow that IC ladder. When I started at SendGrid, there was no ladder at all. It was entirely just engineer, senior engineer, and then you move on into management. And so part of the growth that I saw in that company was also helping figure out what it means to go from senior engineer to someone who's helping lead the technical strategy. And so I've also seen things. Not just through me personally breaking technology, although there was examples of that, but also just watching, how technical decisions can lead to good or bad outcomes later, and how, this is why we did this, and now we made mistakes. And so it was part of my journey in that, and during that time to sort of later on help say, yeah, you're about to have that incident because I did that like 5 years ago. So let me save you from having that incident, hopefully. And so for a long time, and a lot of us know this, the individual contributor career ladder sort of just tapped out at a senior engineer. And then you are generally, if you showed like, signs of being socially like able to do human things, able to talk to people, not as much a writing code only engineer, very quickly you get asked, well, do you want to be a manager? That seemed to be the only path of growth after becoming a senior engineer. And assumptions were baked into that kind of move being done that way for many, many years. There was an assumption that if you can write code and just generate software, that you can also teach and that you can also lead others to do it. Spoiler, that's not actually true. There was an assumption that if you have skills at writing code, that if you know how the code works, then it definitely means you can manage the people writing the code now. Turns out humans don't work like computers, so that didn't really make much sense either. And the engineers who made that move, there was also some assumptions on that side. They assumed that I'm going to be a manager so I can make decisions. I'm going to be a manager so I can tell everybody else what to do. Because back when I was senior engineer, I didn't like that decision that was made, so I'm going to be a manager now so I can actually, be the one making the decision. As engineers, we pride ourselves into knowing a lot of technical details about the things that we build. And I've met many folks who have made that move and still very strongly held on to the idea of also being hands-on, in a sense where they were part of the commitment of building the software, but also ostensibly leading the teams. And it's difficult. That's trying to do two jobs at the same time. And so how it ended up looking, making that move with those kinds of assumptions back then, becoming a manager, you end up with managers who don't actually have the skills to lead a team. The manager job is very different than what we do as StaffPlus, and I'll get into that. So the skills you would need to lead a team of humans as their manager are never taught to us in school or as we grow as engineers. It's honestly, in some cases, was toxic reasons to go into management. And so I've met folks who went into management and then came back to being an IC because they realized that the reasons they did it were actually not healthy reasons. it also brings this idea that the work to get everybody aligned is not really valued. And this is going to be important because that becomes part of our job as StaffPlus engineers down the line. And obviously, like I said, being a manager, but also being hands-on with the code has its dangers. Now, you're going to be like, well, Silvia, like at StaffPlus, we don't actually write code a lot. True. And there's risks to being a StaffPlus engineer and not getting super close to the technical stuff. And I'll cover a little bit later how to sort of toe that line to stay in touch, but also adhere to your leadership duties. And so on it goes. And so folks who sort of grew from engineer into management and try to do all of these jobs at the same time, they end up looking like this. It's really unhealthy. It's not great. I don't recommend it. So at some point in the last, I don't want to throw a number, but it's a fairly recent phenomenon in our field that now everybody is going, yeah, we need a bigger IC ladder. We need an IC ladder that extends past senior engineer, that acknowledges the expertise that folks who have been senior engineers for a while accumulate, that is not just expertise with the keyboard, but more on how systems interact. And we want to use that experience in a way that acknowledges that the uniqueness of that experience, that is not necessarily managing teams. But that sounds nice. That still doesn't explain what that job is. It's a rather ambiguous way of explaining it. What does senior IC even mean then? First and foremost, you're a technical leader. You may not be managing people, but you are seen as a leader. I don't believe in saying that titles don't matter, or that kind of talk that everybody is like we're all engineers here and that kind of thing. We're human beings. We inherently sort of absorb and understand social interactions and social hierarchies. And the reality is, once you go into a certain title structure and you define that our company is going to have a senior IC ladder that goes past seniors engineer, there's a certain social aspect to that, and it impacts interactions. So instead of trying to fight that or try to claim that it doesn't exist, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a thing and to use it as a way to help make your job more effective. So for us as StaffPlus engineers, I think that first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge that we are technical leaders, and that means both you have technical expertise and you're a leader, and you're helping lead others, and not just doing everything yourself. And it involves technical decision making as well. Things like, how do we big databases? That's always the thing I go back to. Should we build this thing on Kubernetes or should we build on managed services? There can be a million decisions that you could be a part of, but the important thing is the StaffPlus folks in an engineering org should be the resource to help sort of guide those decisions based on things they've seen in the past. Typically in org structures, and this is kind of like a footnote of what I've seen work versus not work, typically means you report to a VP, or maybe if the company is not that big just yet, doesn't have that many VPs, maybe report to a senior director. But my point there is you are probably going to be more effective if you report to a leader of leaders in your org closely, and you are peer to the managers and the senior managers and the directors in the org, because at that point, you are sort of their partner in helping lead the engineering org to be more effective and more successful. Cases where I've seen where the StaffPlus engineer does not report to anybody or reports way up to, say, like CTO or something of the sort, it has its risk. You end up kind of not reporting to the person who knows what's happening in the ground, and that can be a problem. Not directly managing people, sure. And I think, at least for me, and for a number of folks that I know who are in the same kind of position, they feel that the job of managing people is a big job, an important job, and it would not be fair to do it and try to also be super involved in technical decisions. However, just because you're not the one writing their performance reviews doesn't mean you're not involved in calibrating their performance, in evaluating how everyone is doing. And so even as myself, as a senior IC, as a StaffPlus engineer, very often I'm involved, whether formally or informally, in figuring out and helping managers of managers sort of understand how everybody's performing, what teams are struggling, what teams are high functioning. That is part of your job, so you got to keep an eye out for that kind of thing, and that's part of your leadership position in the org. And again, big part of the job is you've seen things, and you're trying to help the company avoid tripping on your past mistakes. And I think it's important to recognize that it means that we are acknowledging that we've made mistakes. It's not about, I'm StaffPlus engineer, means everything I've done is perfect. It's actually the opposite. I have done things in the past, I have caused outages, or I have built systems that did not scale in a certain way. And so I'm here to help teach everybody how to not trip on the same mistakes as much as possible. Nova, who is a former coworker of mine and a great person, posted this tweet just yesterday, and I just had to put it in because it's such a nice encapsulation. It's not everything, but it's a very nice encapsulation of what we do day in and day out. And if you notice, a lot of it is questions, not answers. A former boss of mine, my old chief architect, used to always say, our job is to seek to understand. Come in with questions. You're not coming in with answers. We are leaders, but we are coming in to sort of sit with the team and listen to what problem they're trying to solve, ask them clarifying questions, and get an understanding, get a shared understanding before we sort of try to help and give them a slew of options of, here's the paths you can take for this particular problem. But it's very important to start from a place of seeking to understand. Not every two problems are going to look exactly the same. Constraints for solving anything in software engineering are not just about a tech, but also about the people involved, and therefore you have to come in with the humility to sort of ask questions first. And the rest of the questions, these are very questions that I've found myself ask almost every meeting, almost. Hey, you built this thing, it's great. What happens if this service goes down? And that is the job. That is to help sort of mitigate the risk or point out trade-offs that are being made and make sure that everybody is explicitly on the same page as to what trade-offs we're making. I can tell from who's laughing why. Why I use this meme. So this is a story I wanted to tell in the middle here of what our job really means on a multi-year scale. One of my favorite former coworkers was the architect on our mail pipeline for SendGrid, and over at SendGrid we run our own data centers for various reasons, and so. Primary, secondary, all sorts of conversations. And for a number of years, around the time we're planning for our big season, Black Friday and Cyber Monday, he would be posting this meme in our Slack. And he had been advocating for a while and sort of slowly building up to the idea of we need more than just data center redundancy. Our failure modes are more complex than that. And sure enough, after years of work and a lot of having our network team figure out who are our providers, who are the power providers, who are the fiber providers, what is the situation if this thing goes off or if this thing goes off. And for years he had been that was one of the streams that he kept an eye on. And sure enough, last Black Friday, we had one of these take out the one of our big fiber links in our primary data center, and nobody noticed. Shout out to Devin. He was very, very proud of that one. It didn't happen by accident, though. And him as technical leader for that product for a number of years, it's a product management aspect of the job. It is failure mitigation. It is risk mitigation. And so we still love this meme. We still he'll send it to us or we'll send it to him because it was quite a moment of pride to say not only that we delivered, I don't remember how many billion emails over that weekend, that many, but also we had this major failure that we planned for and that we were prepared for. And the senior IC, especially if you're in an architect position for a specific product, is very much being that person in the room who is helping everybody understand that it's not just about the growth, but it's also about the growth safely and being able to absorb certain failure modes. So again, what does senior IC mean? Like this seems like it has a lot of aspects to it. And it's true, the title of this talk is The World is Your Oyster. There's a lot of aspects to this job. Big part of it, like as I mentioned, is product strategy to technical strategy. And my friend Devin is a good example of that one. He was not just involved in helping the teams design the systems, but also involved with product so that they understand what features they're building would be, in line with the big product and therefore had to have these constraints on them for availability and for scaling and all that kind of things. But also helping take the technical strategy and the product strategy that he's working with product on and turn it into a technical execution with all the teams in the org. So it has a lot of it that involves working with product and understanding what they're planning and why they feel that this is the direction that the product needs to go in. Because if you as a senior IC don't know why it is we're building the thing we're building, it'll be very hard to actually help mitigate risks because you're not on the same page as to like what are the things we think will grow the business down the line. It does mean an eye towards technical outcomes. If you are a senior IC with a certain product in a certain company and you don't fully understand the projection of the product growth, it will not help your teams make the right technical choices. You may find down the line that you didn't pick the right database, or that the way we decided to build the software and to deploy it is not helping us make changes fast enough. So being this bridge between product and technical outcomes, that is the senior IC, in my opinion, because you're supposed to expand into understanding more about the business so you can help guide the technical outcomes. And very important part of that is understanding what I call one-way doors. Not every decision carries the same weight or carries the same consequences. And it's going to be part of the skills that you're supposed to grow in this job to understand and to have a conversation and decide how expensive this door is going to be. An obvious one, we picked the wrong database. Well, database migrations suck. We don't like them, and they're expensive. But other choices like, what language are we going to build the thing in? Is this a product that's going to scale highly, and is the service going to need a lot of concurrency? Or is this something that is still brand new? We still don't even know how many customers will use it, and we need something that everybody knows and can write it, and maybe that thing is like Python or something like that. Conversations like this, you need to be able to sort of calibrate your, orient yourself basically to what kind of, how detrimental these choices are, and that's going to happen all the time. It does not mean, however, you're micromanaging the team's execution. I'll go back to being a leader. And a leader has to give trust and sort of help the teams make decisions on their own, but just be there as a subject matter expert, as the person who helps them sort of make the decision, but ultimately you're not micromanaging everything they do. There will be cases where you might have to do that, but it needs to be by far the outlier, and for very specific reasons, if it's really necessary at the moment or something of the sort. But it's not a thing you want to do all the time, because ultimately you're leading and you want to help that team grow to at some point become the next senior IC, either in this team or in a future team. And if you're micromanaging everything they do, that's not a way for them to grow. It does. I make this joke on Twitter a lot, but that's really actually true. There's a lot of ambiguity in our job. Because as I mentioned, this is not just about the tech. This is about the tech and the system of people who are building them. And therefore, what makes sense in one org will not make sense in another. Small example of that, like what language do we use to build the thing? Well, part of that is going to be what's the skill set of your existing team? What's your hiring strategy? So in that context, if you're in one org and there's a lot of Golang expertise, that may make sense. But if you're in a fully Java shop, you've already built the platform to deploy Java apps, and you have the entire ecosystem based on Java. If you come in and say, well, I'm going to write this thing in Scala, or I'm going to write this thing in Go, well, you've just introduced a whole bunch of extra work that may not be necessary, and it doesn't make sense to invest in it. And so it depends. It always depends. Ambiguity is going to have to be a thing you get used to. Now, there's good ambiguity and there's bad ambiguity. Like if it's ambiguity to the point where I don't think our product leadership and our engineering leadership are even on the same page, that might be a bigger problem. But even in healthy orgs, there's going to be some amount of ambiguity as you figure out with product what are the details of the thing you're building. And Scott Riglia later today will be giving a talk about actually, driving some focus and clarity out of ambiguous requirements. Because as a senior IC, you should also not expect product to come to you with all of the requirements. Product orgs notoriously just do not have the skill set to foresee things like scale, things like what is terribly named non-functional requirements, like what's the availability SLO, what is the uptime, things of that sort. So that's going to be you. And again, I go back to this is why a good part of your job will be working with product as well. Also later today, Ryan Harder and Katie Seiler-Miller will be talking about focus and long-term planning, and all of that goes towards what that job means. How does it work exactly? One of my favorite analogies about this, metaphors actually, the lighthouse. And credit where due, this next picture is going to be, is not mine, is by my friend Sean Kilgore, who is also an architect I've worked with for a very long time. And your job is, like I mentioned, not to microplan everything. The job is to figure out what's the lighthouse, what is our product strategy, what is our future, what do we want our future platform to look like, what do we want our future and software state to look like, and sort of help steer the org towards that. Helping figure out which decisions get us closer towards that bay to land at that vision, and which of them are sort of not as consequential. And a big part of it is also helping the org, the future get better, basically. Like you want to help make decisions that will make your future delivery more efficient and more predictable than it was beforehand. And yeah, it will involve a lot of influence because, as I mentioned, you're not managing the people. You don't actually own any resources. But you are pairing closely with those who have the headcount to sort of make sure that we're using everybody's time efficiently. Later today, Leslie Chapman and Matty Toya will be talking about influence in large orgs. And I'm personally looking forward to those. That is the picture. And as you can see, you're not going to go a straight line. Nobody does that. We would love that, but that's the real world. And it's basically helping decisions that sort of steer you towards the way, and understanding when you've made a decision that goes completely in the wrong direction, and then figuring out how to come back towards the vision that you and the rest of the org's leadership have agreed on as your future plan. Now, there's definitely stereotypes that come with this job. We joke about them on Twitter a lot. The ivory tower, purple ropes come to mind. I tried to find a meme for this, could not. Absolute fail. But we all know what that's about. Like, there's all this like jokes that we make about, oh, enterprise architect. These are real in some sense. I mean, we joke about it on Twitter, obviously, because that's what Twitter is for. But these are real because there are folks who have worked with with architects, or for lack of a better, like those in those positions who have definitely kind of lost touch a little bit with how the work is done. And I would caution against dismissing them. And I would also caution, try not, be aware. The self-awareness that needs to come to this job so you don't become that person is also very important. You have to get used to figuring out how the teams work. And the way you do that is you need to keep swinging back and forth between tactical and strategic. Part of it is going to be understanding how the teams that you help lead actually get work done, so that when you are back into the strategic and helping sort of figure out where we're going, you have an understanding of how the team works, and therefore not have those two things clash. And that's very important. How do you actually, though, stay in touch? Because, again, this job does not come with, I'm going to be taking Jira tickets and committing to and doing PRs on the code. It's a lot more influence and a lot more conversations with people to sort of align everybody towards a common goal. This is one thing that I do a lot. Incidents are huge opportunities for learning, not just for the team, but for you. You find that these are unique opportunities to sort of, understand what the team's mental model of the software they wrote was supposed to be, and you get to watch in this incident how that mental model was inaccurate in certain ways. And a lot of times, if the org is actually working towards good learning from incident practices, you sit with them in post-incident reviews, and you get to see how they lay out, well, this thing looks like that because 5 years ago, these were the constraints at hand, and this is why we built it that way. But since then, our customers started using it in this whole other different way, and this is why now it broke, because we did not plan for this entire new use case. Conversations like this will help you stay close to how the org makes stick decisions and how the team thinks about the consequences of their decisions. Big part of that is be with the team. When you're in an incident with the team, there's a lot of writings out there about psychological safety and how to sort of be a leader but not sort of change the dynamic of the conversation. Delegate those technical decisions, solutions, but stay close by so that you can help them not go through like expensive one-way doors. Reminder, though, that this is a team sport. You need peers, both inside your org and outside. This has to be a team effort. Now, in some cases, you might be the first to get the title, and therefore, the team sport needs to start with your VPs, your senior directors, people of that sort. But you have to have support. Events like this hopefully will help make this a lot easier for folks as well. Later today, David Daly is going to be giving a talk about peer groups and how to build those. So hopefully you will be there for that. And you have to remember that your team is not just engineering. As a senior IC, you are supposed to be heavily invested in the business outcomes. And that involves legal, finance, compliance, security. You may not need all of those people all the time. But depending on what decision is at hand, depending on what one-way door you're looking at, this is an important one to keep an eye on and to have built the relationship in those parts of the org to be able to go back and help them guide your decision. Again, lots and lots of choices. Sometimes you'll be doing product management. Sometimes you'll be talking through compliance burdens. Sometimes you'll be way, way deep into why this thing is not doing the concurrency and the throughput we expected it to. And part of the skill you have to build is figure out which of those you need at what a given time. Like I said, it will vary from tactical to strategic depending on the day and depending on the decision at hand. And that's very important, so you can keep your team actually trusting your decision making and help and sort of have everybody's back when you're making those decisions. Sometimes it can be all the way down to like, sprint planning or project management, but you need to know when your calories are not spent efficiently. I was talking with Brian earlier today, and he made the point that his wife was like, you're not being paid to write code. You're being paid to help make big decisions. And you have to remind yourself constantly that you are a leader, and it's important to sort of make sure that your time is spent to get the org forward and not just to do the thing that you feel like doing right now. And yeah, this job is pretty big, and I hope that you all enjoy the talks that are for the rest of the day today. It's going to be fun.